During the Great Depression, Amish families grew more than just food. They grew survival. These 25 rare vegetables helped them make it through harsh times without money or machines. Most people today have never heard of them, but for the Amish, they were life. It doesn't look like much, just a long, thin root with rough brown skin, but to Amish families during the Great Depression, salsify was more than just a vegetable, it was a lifeline. In a time when fields were dry, shelves were bare, and meals had to be stretched as far as possible, this strange root found its place on the table again and again. Salsify is sometimes called the oyster plant because when it's cooked, it has a mild flavor that reminds some people of oysters. The Amish didn't need fancy ingredients or seasonings to make it work. They would peel the root, boil it until soft, and either mash it with butter or stir it into stews. Some even fried it in lard for a crispy edge. It wasn't flashy or bold, but it was filling, and it helped families stay fed. One of the best things about salsify was how easy it was to grow. It didn't need rich soil, heavy care, or much water. In fact, it often did better in poor soil where other crops might fail. Amish farmers liked that it could be planted in spring or fall, depending on the weather. It grew slow and steady, and when harvest time came, it didn't demand much effort to dig up. For people working without machines, that mattered a lot. Salsify was also great for storage. Once picked, the roots could be packed in sand or kept in a cool cellar and used through the cold months. While other foods spoiled, salsify stuck around. That made it useful in January and February when fresh vegetables were nowhere to be found. Even just a few roots could stretch a soup or make a meal more complete. Most people today don't even know what salsify is. It's disappeared from gardens and store shelves. But during the hardest days, it was a quiet hero in Amish kitchens. It didn't draw attention to itself. It simply did what it was supposed to do: grow without complaint, feed without fuss, and help families survive when little else would. Not all heroes are big. Some are small, hidden underground, and often forgotten. Skirret is one of them. It's a vegetable that looks like a handful of skinny white carrots all bunched together. Most modern people have never heard of it, but Amish families once relied on it to help get through cold winters and hard times. Skirret is part of the Old World, brought to America long ago, then kept alive in Amish gardens while the rest of the country moved on. It grows best in rich, loose soil and doesn't mind the cold. The Amish liked it because it didn't take up much space, and once the plant was pulled from the ground, it gave several roots at once. One plant could feed an entire family, especially when food was scarce. Cooking skirret was simple. Some families boiled it, while others roasted it with onions and potatoes. It has a sweet flavor, almost like a cross between a carrot and a parsnip. People said it tasted even better after the first frost. Others chopped it into stews, soups, or mashed it with a little salt and butter. There were no cookbooks, just handed down knowledge from mothers and grandmothers who knew how to make the most of what they had. Skirret was also a strong plant. It didn't fall over in storms. It didn't rot quickly. If you left it in the ground a little longer, it didn't spoil. And once picked, the roots could be stored in a cool basement or cellar for weeks. This made it perfect for the winter months when meals had to be planned carefully and every bit of food was important. Back then, nobody grew skirret to make money. It wasn't sold in markets or shipped across states. It was grown for survival, for the quiet strength it gave to those who planted it. Today, it's nearly gone. But in the memories of Amish families who lived through the Depression, skirret still holds a place of honor. Not because it was special, but because it helped them carry on. Tucked inside a light brown husk, like a gift waiting to be opened, the ground cherry was one of the Amish community's best-kept secrets. Not really a cherry at all. This small yellow fruit is closer to a tomato. But don't let its size or name fool you. It packed a lot of sweetness into a tiny package. And in the days of the Great Depression, when sugar and fruit were hard to come by, ground cherries were a rare treat that didn't cost a thing. Amish families loved these fruits for more than just their taste. They grew easily, even in dry summers or poor soil. Once planted, they spread quickly across the garden. Kids would help gather the fruits after they fell to the ground, hence the name. There was something fun and hopeful about peeling back the husk to find the golden ball inside. It was nature's candy, wrapped and ready. In the kitchen, ground cherries were incredibly useful. Amish mothers stirred them into thick jams or baked them into pies that reminded families of better times. When there wasn't enough fruit to go around, a bowl of ground cherries could turn a simple meal into something special. Some were eaten fresh, while others were dried or preserved in jars with sugar or honey. They gave flavor to winter when the land outside was cold and quiet. One of their biggest strengths was storage. Unlike many fruits that bruise or spoil, ground cherries last for weeks, sometimes even months, if kept in a cool, dry place. Their husks helped protect them, which meant they didn't rot quickly like peaches or berries. During the harsh months when nothing grew, Amish families could still open their cellar and pull out something sweet. Today, most people wouldn't recognize a ground cherry if they saw one, but during the hardest years, they offered more than just calories. They gave comfort. They gave color to gray days. And they reminded families that even in the middle of hardship, sweetness could still grow, quietly, humbly, and close to home. Small, twisty, and often overlooked, Crosnes were another unusual vegetable that played a big part in Amish survival during the Great Depression. These nutty-tasting tubers don't grow tall or showy. In fact, most of the time they stay hidden underground. But that's exactly what made them so valuable, especially during hard winters when the soil froze and food was scarce. Crosnes are part of the mint family, though they don't taste minty at all. They look like tiny white caterpillars and are usually no longer than a finger. Their flavor is light and nutty, and their texture stays crisp even after cooking. For the Amish, this meant they could use them in many ways, sautéed in butter, tossed into soups, or pickled for later. Some even served them with vinegar or herbs for a simple side dish. These tubers were tough. They grew in rough soil and weren't bothered much by frost. Since they stayed underground, they were protected from storms, wind, and sudden cold snaps. That made them a dependable crop during unpredictable weather. Amish farmers could dig them up late in the season, long after other vegetables had stopped growing, and because they grew in clusters, even a small patch could provide a decent amount of food. Crosnes didn't spoil quickly either. Once harvested, they could be kept in sand or cool storage for weeks. That made them perfect for winter meals. When canned goods ran low and root vegetables started to rot, a stash of Crosnes could stretch out food supplies and add variety to dull plates. Their crispness was a welcome change in a season full of soft, mushy leftovers. Most people today don't even know the name Crosnes, but during the Great Depression, they were one of the quiet fighters of the Amish garden. They didn't look powerful, they didn't grow tall, but they were steady, reliable, and always ready when needed. In times when survival came down to what you could grow and keep, these little roots made all the difference. The first signs of spring didn't always come from flowers. Sometimes they came from a small, round-leafed green called Claytonia. Also known as miner's lettuce, this plant was one of the earliest edible greens to appear after a long, cold winter. For Amish families, it was more than just a plant. It was a promise that the earth was waking up again. Claytonia didn't need careful planting. It grew wild in fields, along paths, and near fences. Amish children often picked it while walking to school or doing morning chores. They knew exactly what to look for: a cluster of small, shiny leaves shaped like lily pads with a tiny white flower in the center. It was easy to spot and even easier to enjoy. The taste of Claytonia is fresh and mild, with a slight crunch. It didn't need cooking. Most Amish families used it raw in early spring salads. Sometimes they added vinegar, salt, or just a splash of cream. After months of eating dried, stored, or canned foods, a bowl of fresh greens was a big deal. It gave their bodies important vitamins, especially vitamin C, when it was most needed. Claytonia didn't just feed the body, it lifted spirits. After a long winter, its soft leaves reminded families that warmer days were coming. It didn't require seeds or garden space. Nature provided it freely, and the Amish knew to take only what they needed so it would return next year. While many people today have forgotten about Claytonia, it was once a springtime treasure. It asked for no care but gave plenty in return. The Amish didn't need grocery stores to find fresh greens. They looked to the woods, the fields, and the knowledge passed down through generations. And year after year, miner's lettuce reminded them that survival wasn't just about having enough food. It was about knowing when to gather, where to look, and how to live close to the land. To most people today, lamb's quarters would just look like a weed. But to Amish families during the Great Depression, it was a dependable and nutritious green that could turn any simple meal into something special. It didn't need planting, watering, or weeding. It grew on its own, often in the same spots every year. That made it a wild gift from the land, ready to be picked whenever times were tough. Lamb's quarters has dusty green leaves shaped like diamonds, and it grows fast, sometimes reaching waist height. Amish children were taught how to recognize it early on. Once picked, the leaves could be cooked just like spinach. They were boiled, steamed, or tossed into soups and stews. Some families even added the tender leaves to eggs or baked them into savory pies. What made lamb's quarters valuable wasn't just its taste, it was packed with nutrients. This weed had more vitamins than many store-bought vegetables. It was especially rich in iron, calcium, and vitamin A. For people who didn't have access to fresh produce year-round, these wild greens were a real health booster. Even better, lamb's quarters reseeded on their own. If you let a few plants go to seed in the summer, they'd pop back up next year in the same spot. That meant families didn't need to plant them. They just needed to remember where they grew. In a world without sprays or garden chemicals, this plant did all the work. And there's something powerful about a vegetable that grows without being asked. Lamb's quarters didn't require much, but it gave a lot. It reminded Amish families that food could come from unexpected places, even from the edges of fields and fence lines. And during the Great Depression, when store shelves were empty and money was tight, a simple pot of boiled greens could mean the difference between hunger and comfort. Today, people pull up lamb's quarters without a second thought, but the Amish remember its value, not just as a plant, but as a quiet survivor that helped carry families through the hardest of times. At first glance, a cardoon might look like an oversized stalk of celery, but looks can be deceiving. This hardy, spiny plant is actually a cousin of the artichoke and was once a secret weapon in Amish kitchens during the Great Depression. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't sweet, but it was strong, dependable, and full of flavor. Everything a survival food needed to be. Cardoons grow tall and thick with silvery green stalks that are covered in small thorns. They need a bit of work before they're ready for the table. Amish families knew how to trim the outer layers, peel the stalks, and soak them in salted water to remove any bitterness. Once prepped, the cardoon became the heart of many hearty meals. The taste? Think of a mild artichoke crossed with celery, but softer when cooked. Amish cooks boiled the stalks until tender, then added them to soups, stews, or even scrambled eggs. On special days, they might fry the stalks in lard with breadcrumbs. It was a filling, warming dish, perfect for the cold months or long workdays in the fields. What made cardoons so useful was their toughness. They thrived in cooler weather and weren't scared off by frost. Their large size meant one plant could feed several people, and because they grew upright and strong, they didn't need much help. Just good soil, patience, and old-fashioned know-how. Back then, cardoons weren't something you bought. They were something you learned to grow. Seeds were saved year after year and passed down through generations. Each spring, the same patch would be replanted and families would wait for the long stalks to rise again. Today, most people have never tasted a cardoon, but in Amish history, it holds a proud place. It reminded people that food didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. Sometimes the plants with the toughest skin hide the most useful gifts, and during the hardest days, that was exactly what the Amish needed. Celeriac doesn't win any beauty contests. It's knobby, rough, and often covered in dirt. But when the Great Depression hit, Amish families didn't care about looks. They cared about what filled bellies, stretched meals, and stayed good through the winter. And for that, celeriac was perfect. Unlike regular celery, celeriac grows underground. It forms a round, firm root that can be as big as a softball. The leaves above ground look a lot like celery tops, but it's the root that holds the real value. With its mild, earthy flavor and soft texture when cooked, celeriac became a go-to ingredient in many Amish meals. Amish cooks had several ways to use it. Some peeled and chopped it into stews, letting it soak up the flavor of broth and vegetables. Others boiled it and mashed it like potatoes. The texture was creamy, and the taste had a slight celery kick, just enough to add something special to simple dishes. On tougher days, slices of celeriac were even fried or added to pancakes to bulk up the meal. One of the best things about celeriac was its shelf life. After harvest, it could be kept in cool storage or packed in sand for months. That meant families could pull it out during the dead of winter when the fields were frozen and the shelves were nearly empty. It was steady, reliable, and always ready to help. Celeriac also didn't take up much space in the garden. A small patch could grow enough roots to last all season. It didn't ask for much, but it gave a lot, a trait the Amish deeply valued. While many today pass over celeriac in stores without a second look, Amish families once leaned on it during the hardest years. It was never about how it looked, it was about how it helped. And in those long, hungry winters, celeriac was the quiet root that helped families make it to spring. In the hardest years of the Great Depression, even simple comforts like a cup of coffee became luxuries many couldn't afford. But the Amish had a backup plan. chicory root. This strong, deep-growing plant wasn't just another weed in the field. It was a coffee substitute, a salad green, and a reminder that survival sometimes meant turning to the unexpected. Chicory grows tall with bright blue flowers that dot the edges of fields and roads, but its real treasure is hidden underground, a thick, tough root that can be dug up, cleaned, roasted, and ground. When brewed, it creates a dark drink with a bold, slightly bitter taste, close enough to coffee that it helped take the edge off a cold morning. The Amish didn't need store-bought beans when chicory was growing wild just beyond the fence. Roasting chicory took time and patience. The roots were chopped, slowly dried, then toasted over heat until dark and fragrant. Once ground, the result could be mixed with a little real coffee or brewed on its own. It gave a warm, earthy flavor that many Amish families grew to love, and it came straight from the soil, free and dependable. But chicory wasn't just for drinking. When young, its leafy tops could be picked and eaten like lettuce. Though they had a slightly bitter taste, Amish cooks balanced that with vinegar or cream. It made for a healthy green salad during early spring when not much else had sprouted yet. The strength of chicory was in its toughness. It grew deep roots that pulled nutrients from below the surface. It could handle dry soil and came back each year with little help. For Amish families, it was a quiet reminder that even weeds can carry great value if you know what to do with them. Today, chicory is mostly forgotten, but for those who lived through lean times, it wasn't just a plant. It was a way to keep morning routines alive and meals more complete. It stood tall in the field, offered its roots without fuss, and helped families get through without giving up the small joys. With a name that sounds like something out of a storybook, Mangle might make people smile. But back in the Great Depression, it was no joke. This giant root, part of the beet family, was usually grown for animals. But when times got hard, the Amish turned to it for their own tables, too. It was big, filling, and easy to grow, everything a struggling family needed. Mangelwurzel, often just called mangle, grew huge in the ground. Some roots could reach the size of a football or bigger. Their skin was rough and pale, not the deep red of regular beets, but what they lacked in beauty, they made up for in volume. One root could stretch across several meals, feeding a family when there wasn't much else around. Amish farmers appreciated how simple they were to grow. Mangles needed little care. They liked cool weather and could handle poor soil. Once planted, they pretty much took care of themselves. The leaves above ground could be picked young and cooked like spinach. The root itself, once peeled, was boiled or roasted like a turnip or potato. The flavor was mild and earthy, not sweet like red beets, but still tasty when seasoned well. Amish cooks sometimes mashed it with butter or served it alongside beans or cabbage. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and heavy in the stomach, and during tough winters, that kind of comfort mattered. What made Mangelwurzel really useful was its long storage life. Pulled from the field in late fall, it could be kept in root cellars for months without spoiling. Even in January, when gardens were dead and canned goods were running low, families could rely on a few mangles to stretch meals and keep hunger away. Today, very few people grow or eat Mangelwurzel. But for Amish families trying to survive on what the land could offer, it was a trusted friend. It didn't pretend to be anything more than it was. Big, plain, and dependable, exactly what survival required. The name might confuse you. Jerusalem artichokes don't come from Jerusalem, and they aren't artichokes. But none of that mattered to Amish families during the Great Depression. What did matter was that these strange-looking tubers could grow easily, feed a family, and survive the cold. Most folks just called them sunchokes, and they were one of the smartest vegetables to have in the ground when times got rough. Sunchokes are part of the sunflower family. Above the soil, they grow tall with bright yellow flowers that look cheerful even in late summer. But the real food is underground, where they grow small, knobby tubers that look a bit like ginger root. Amish farmers knew that once the flowers faded, it was time to dig up the treasure beneath the surface. These tubers had a light, nutty flavor and a crisp texture. They could be eaten raw, but most families preferred to roast or fry them. When cooked, they turned soft and slightly sweet. Some added them to soups, while others sliced them into stews or mashed them like potatoes. A good harvest of sunchokes meant dozens of ways to stretch meals without needing much from the store. One of the best things about sunchokes was how little effort they required. They were almost wild. Once planted, they'd come back every year, spreading on their own. That meant no new seeds to buy and no tilling or special care. In fact, if you weren't careful, they'd take over the whole garden. But for families trying to survive, that wasn't a problem. It was a blessing. Sunchokes also kept well in root cellars. Dug up in late fall, they could be stored for months. Even in the middle of winter, Amish families could pull out a basketful and have something fresh and filling. They were hearty, humble, and easy to love once you knew how to cook them. Today, sunchokes are slowly coming back into kitchens, but the Amish never stopped using them. They knew the value of food that keeps coming back year after year without asking for much. In the hardest times, it's the quiet crops like these that keep people going. Kohlrabi doesn't look like your average vegetable. It grows as a round, pale bulb that sits above the soil with leafy stems sticking out like little arms. Some people say it looks like a space plant, but during the Great Depression, Amish families weren't worried about how it looked. They were thankful for how much it could do. This hardy vegetable grows fast and doesn't need much room, which made it perfect for smaller gardens. Amish farmers could plant kohlrabi early in spring or again in late summer, and it would be ready to eat within a few weeks. It wasn't fussy about soil and could handle cooler weather, so it grew when other crops didn't. The flavor of kohlrabi is gentle and fresh, kind of like a mix between cabbage and broccoli stems. Once peeled, the bulb could be shredded into slaw, chopped into soups, or stewed with potatoes and onions. Some Amish families liked it boiled and mashed. Others sliced it thin and fried it in butter. It could take on many flavors, which made it useful in all kinds of meals. Its leaves were edible too. Young and tender ones were cooked just like collard greens. That meant one plant could give two types of food. In a time when every bit of nutrition mattered, nothing went to waste. Kohlrabi also stored well. After harvest, it could be kept in a cellar or cool room for weeks. Families could pick it in fall and still be eating it by the time snow covered the ground. For Amish cooks planning meals with limited supplies, that reliability was gold. Most people today don't give kohlrabi much attention. But back when grocery trips were rare and gardens had to provide nearly everything, this simple bulb was a quiet champion. The Amish didn't grow food for show, they grew it for survival, and kohlrabi proved itself again and again as one of the most dependable vegetables in their patch. The end of winter always brought one big question. What's the first thing to eat from the garden? For Amish families during the Great Depression, the answer was often sorrel. This leafy green popped up early, sometimes while snow still hugged the edges of the field. It was one of the first fresh foods after months of root vegetables, dried beans, and canned goods. And it brought more than just color. It brought flavor and nutrition when people needed it most. Sorrel grows in small bunches with long, smooth leaves that look a bit like spinach. But when you bite into it, you know it's something different. It has a sharp lemony taste that wakes up the tongue. That sour flavor came from oxalic acid, which is safe in small amounts and gave soups and stews a fresh tang. For Amish cooks who had been serving heavy, plain meals all winter, a handful of sorrel was a gift. It didn't take much to grow. In fact, many Amish families didn't need to plant it at all. It returned on its own each year. It thrived in cooler weather and came back even stronger if a little patch was left alone. Some families grew it near the house so it would be easy to pick for lunch or dinner. Others found it growing wild along fences or under trees and knew exactly when to harvest. In the kitchen, sorrel was added to potato soup, stirred into broths, or wilted with a bit of cream or butter. A little went a long way, and its bright taste made everything feel new again. It also had real health value, rich in vitamin C and other nutrients that helped boost energy after a long winter. While most modern kitchens have forgotten about sorrel, the Amish remembered it for what it really was, a signal of spring, a boost to the spirit, and a simple green that made hard meals taste like hope. Sometimes survival doesn't come in large harvests. It comes in the first few green leaves that say, "We made it through." Despite its name, sea kale doesn't grow near the ocean, and it doesn't taste like seaweed, but it was one of the most useful greens Amish families relied on when times got tough. With its thick blue-green leaves and strong cabbage-like structure, sea kale stood out in the garden and on the dinner table. This unusual plant wasn't common in every garden, but the Amish knew its value. It was tough, resilient, and able to grow in soil where other greens might fail. It didn't mind salt in the ground, dry days, or even cold nights. That made it a perfect crop for early spring or late fall, when many other vegetables had already come and gone. The leaves of sea kale were the main attraction. Amish cooks picked them young and tender, then chopped and sautéed them like collards or kale. Others boiled the leaves and served them with butter and vinegar for a tangy, filling side dish. They also used it in soups and hearty stews. The thick texture helped stretch out smaller meals and added a satisfying chew that made dinner feel more complete. But the real magic happened underground. Sea kale developed strong roots that helped the plant come back year after year. Once planted, a single patch could feed a family for seasons to come. That made it one of the few garden vegetables that didn't require replanting every spring. For Amish families working the land with simple tools and no electricity, this kind of plant saved both time and effort. Sea kale was also a storage-friendly green. The leaves could be picked and kept cool for a few days without wilting too quickly. Some families even preserved them by cooking and packing them in jars. This gave them a rare green option in the middle of winter. Most grocery stores today don't carry sea kale, and most people wouldn't recognize it. But to the Amish during the Great Depression, it was more than just a plant. It was a survivor, a quiet green that grew when others didn't. It offered strength, comfort, and nutrition without needing much in return. In hard times, that's exactly the kind of vegetable that makes all the difference. At first glance, Hamburg parsley looks just like any ordinary parsley growing in the garden. Its leafy green top is nearly identical, frilly, bright, and full of that familiar herby scent. But hidden beneath the soil is where the real surprise lies. This old-world vegetable grows a long white root that served as a dependable food source for Amish families during the Great Depression. It wasn't grown for garnish. It was grown for survival. Hamburg parsley offered 2 harvests in one. The greens could be picked and used early on to flavor soups and stews, much like regular parsley. But as the season went on, families waited patiently for what was developing under the dirt. When it came time to pull it up, the root looked much like a parsnip, straight, pale, and firm. It could be peeled, boiled, mashed, or roasted. Amish cooks often treated it just like they would carrots or potatoes, tossing it into soups or slicing it into hearty vegetable dishes. The flavor of the root was mild and slightly sweet, but with a bit of an earthy edge. That made it perfect for mixing with stronger vegetables or for standing on its own in a simple broth. It was also easy to digest and filling, making it great for children and the elderly. In times when meat was scarce or expensive, a bowl of root stew could stretch across several meals. Hamburg parsley didn't ask for much. It could handle cooler weather and wasn't picky about the soil. Amish gardeners appreciated how little attention it needed. Once planted, it quietly grew while other crops demanded care. Its long taproot reached deep into the ground, pulling up nutrients and holding moisture even during dry spells. Another advantage? It stored well. Once harvested in late fall, the roots could be packed in sand or kept cool in a root cellar for weeks. This allowed Amish families to enjoy its benefits deep into the winter. Today, most people overlook Hamburg parsley, thinking it's just another herb. But to those who knew its secrets, it was a 2-in-1 treasure, a green on top, a meal underneath. And during the hardest times, it reminded families that even the simplest plants can hold something special when you take a closer look. Scorzonera may not win awards for appearance, but its usefulness during the Great Depression made it a quiet champion in Amish gardens. Known as black salsify for its dark, rough outer skin, this root was both humble and dependable. It grew where others struggled, tasted better than it looked, and helped fill hungry stomachs when money and supplies ran thin. To the Amish, Scorzonera wasn't just another crop. It was a reliable friend beneath the soil. Its root grew long and straight, with black skin on the outside and white flesh on the inside. Though it looked tough, once peeled and cooked, it became soft, sweet, and slightly nutty in flavor, more delicate than potatoes and richer than carrots. Amish cooks used it in many ways. It could be boiled and mashed like a turnip, sliced thin and added to soups, or even baked into casseroles. It held its shape well and didn't fall apart in the pot, which made it a great ingredient for long-cooked stews. On occasion, it was even fried in butter or fat for a crispy side dish that felt almost fancy, even if the times were anything but. Scorzonera also had strong health benefits. It was known to help with digestion and gave energy without being too heavy. Families who worked long days on the farm could count on it to be both nourishing and gentle on the stomach. What made it so valuable, especially during harsh winters, was its staying power. Scorzonera could stay in the ground long after the frost had come. In fact, its flavor improved after a cold snap. That meant Amish families could harvest it when they truly needed it, late in the season when the rest of the garden was bare. Even though it takes patience to grow and care to prepare, Scorzonera gave back much more than it required. It didn't need to shine, it just needed to serve, and in the cold, quiet days of the Depression, it did just that. While the world above changed and struggled, Scorzonera stayed hidden, waiting patiently underground, ready to feed the hands that remembered it was there. In times when crops came and went with the seasons, having a vegetable that grew all year was a rare gift. That's why tree collards earned a special place in some Amish gardens, especially in areas with milder weather. These tall, leafy greens weren't planted every season. They didn't need reseeding or babying. Once established, they stood tall like green towers, offering fresh leaves whenever families needed them. Tree collards look a bit like kale, but they grow more like a small bush or tree. Their sturdy stalks reach several feet high, and thick, flat leaves grow outward and upward. In places where winter isn't too harsh, they keep producing even through cold months. That made them incredibly valuable to the Amish during the Great Depression, when fresh greens were hard to come by in winter and early spring. Families would harvest just what they needed, 1 or 2 leaves at a time, never too many, so the plant stayed healthy. The leaves were usually cooked, not eaten raw. They had a strong, earthy taste and a slightly chewy texture, making them perfect for boiling, stewing, or frying with a bit of butter and onion. Sometimes they were mixed with beans or added to broth for simple but warming meals. One plant could last several years. That meant less work, fewer seeds, and more food with less effort. For Amish families, especially those trying to stretch every resource, that was a big win. Tree collards also didn't take up much space. A few could grow near the house, ready to pick on short notice, even in the rain or snow. Because they were so dependable, tree collards became part of daily life. People didn't think twice about stepping outside and picking dinner right off the stem. They were quiet helpers, always there, always growing. Today, most gardeners don't know about tree collards, but for Amish families trying to survive hard times without modern tools or stores, these leafy greens were a steady, faithful source of nutrition. In a garden full of seasons, they stayed green, strong, and always ready. Some plants grow straight and still. Others move slowly, year after year, without making a sound. Walking onions are one of the few vegetables that seem to move across a garden, and during the Great Depression, Amish families saw their strange behavior as a blessing. Unlike regular onions, walking onions don't just grow underground. Instead, they grow small bulbs called topsets at the top of tall green stalks. When the topsets get heavy, the stalk bends toward the ground, dropping the bulbs. These bulbs then root themselves into the soil and grow into a new plant. Over time, it looks like the onion has walked across the garden. This self-planting habit made them perfect for Amish families who didn't have time or resources to replant every year. Once a patch of walking onions was started, it could spread on its own, and because they were hardy, they could survive tough weather, poor soil, and even frost. That made them reliable, even when other crops failed. The onions themselves were small but strong in flavor. The green stalks were used like scallions or leeks, while the underground bulbs had a bite like regular onions. Amish cooks used them in everything: soups, stews, fried eggs, and pickled jars. Nothing went to waste. If the topsets weren't replanted, they were chopped and eaten too. Walking onions were more than just food. They were a long-term plan. They took care of themselves. Families didn't have to buy new seeds, and they didn't need to remember to plant each spring. Once the cycle started, the onions kept giving, season after season, year after year. Today, walking onions are rare in modern grocery stores, but the Amish never let them go. They understood their quiet strength, the way they kept showing up, even when times were hard. In a world where most things had to be done by hand, these onions did their part all on their own, and that made them one of the most dependable vegetables in any survival garden. When the frost came and most plants gave up, winter purslane kept growing. This cold-loving green, also called miner's lettuce in some areas, was a quiet hero in Amish gardens during the Great Depression. It didn't need warmth, and it didn't need rich soil. It just kept pushing out small heart-shaped leaves, fresh, green, and ready to eat, even in the middle of winter. For Amish families who depended on what they could grow, winter purslane was one of the few ways to get fresh vitamins during the coldest months. When root vegetables were softening and canned goods were running low, this tender green brought new life to the table. It was high in vitamin C, iron, and other nutrients that help keep families strong and healthy during long winters. Winter purslane grows close to the ground and spreads quickly. Once planted, it often came back year after year, especially in sheltered garden corners or near buildings. Amish children were taught how to spot it early. Tiny green leaves shining against the snow or frozen soil. Harvesting was simple. Just pinch the leaves and let the plant keep growing. In the kitchen, Amish cooks used it in several ways. The most common was tossing it into salads with vinegar or cream, giving meals a mild, slightly lemony taste. Some families stirred it into soups at the last minute, keeping its flavor bright and its texture crisp. Others used it like spinach, lightly cooked and served with potatoes or beans. The best thing about winter purslane was its timing. It grew when very little else did. It was one of the few fresh things available in January and February, and it didn't need much effort to thrive. That made it a valuable and welcome part of the Amish diet when the cold made everything else slow down. Today, most people have never heard of winter purslane, but for Amish families who needed every advantage to survive tough seasons, this small green meant the world. It didn't shout for attention. It just grew, quietly, steadily, and always right when it was needed most. Not every vegetable is meant to be sweet or soft. Some bring fire, and during the Great Depression, that fire had a purpose. Horseradish, with its spicy, sharp root, was one of the boldest crops in the Amish garden. It wasn't eaten in large bites, but a little went a long way. For families trying to stretch bland or boiled meals, horseradish gave food the kick it needed to feel alive again. This tough root plant grows well in cooler climates and doesn't ask for much. In fact, once planted, horseradish often spreads and comes back year after year without any help. Amish families liked that. It meant one root could lead to a lifetime supply. Even when the weather turned harsh, it waited underground, strong and untouched by frost, until it was dug up and put to use. The roots were thick, knobby, and hard to miss once pulled from the soil. Grating them was no small task. Tears would run down your face from the strong fumes, but the result was worth it. Amish cooks mixed the fresh grated root with vinegar, salt, and sometimes sugar to make a strong sauce that lasted for weeks in a jar. It became a staple at the table, especially in winter when meals grew repetitive. Horseradish paired well with meats, potatoes, or even beans. Just a spoonful added flavor and heat, waking up tired taste buds. It was also believed to help with digestion and sinus issues, which made it more than just food. It was kitchen medicine. What made horseradish so useful during hard times was how little it demanded. No special tools, no fancy care, just space to grow and time to mature. Even a forgotten root left in the ground would return stronger the next year. Most people today only see horseradish in jars at the store, but to Amish families living without electricity or grocery chains, it was homemade flavor, healing, and heat, all wrapped into one strong root. In a season full of dull meals, horseradish reminded families that a little spice could go a long way. When meals needed to be stretched and root cellars were running low, the rutabaga was one vegetable the Amish could always count on. A cross between a turnip and a cabbage, rutabagas were large, hardy, and easy to grow. During the Great Depression, they were a regular part of Amish life, not because they were trendy or exciting, but because they filled plates, filled stomachs, and lasted through the coldest months. Rutabagas grow underground like potatoes, with a round shape and yellowish flesh. Their skin is thick, sometimes with a purple tint near the top. They're tough, but not in a bad way. That toughness meant they could handle frost, poor soil, and long winters without spoiling. Once picked, they could sit in a root cellar for months and still be just as good to eat. The flavor of rutabaga is mild and earthy, with a hint of sweetness. Amish cooks had plenty of ways to prepare it. Most often, it was boiled and mashed, just like potatoes, often with butter or cream. It could also be sliced and baked with other vegetables, or cubed and tossed into soups and stews to make meals more filling. Some even fried rutabaga slices in fat for a crispy, comforting side dish. Rutabaga didn't just offer food, it offered flexibility. One large root could serve several people, and it didn't need special handling. It grew well in cool weather and didn't need much attention once planted. For families already stretched thin by work, cold, and worry, that made it a near-perfect crop. It was also easy to store. Amish families could harvest their rutabagas in the fall and keep them packed in sand or straw through winter. While other vegetables rotted or froze, rutabagas stayed firm and ready to use. Today, rutabagas are often ignored in favor of flashier vegetables, but during the hardest years, they were dependable, affordable, and long-lasting. In a world where everything else was uncertain, this simple root helped Amish families put warm meals on the table, season after season, with little complaint and big rewards. Deep in the soil, burdock grows long, sturdy roots that don't quit, not even in drought or poor soil. While many people today know burdock for its use in herbal medicine, the Amish once saw it for something even more important: food. During the Great Depression, burdock root was dug up, cleaned off, and cooked into filling meals when options were few and hunger was near. Burdock doesn't look like much above the ground, just big green leaves on tall stems, but underground, it forms a long, thin root that can stretch down more than 2 feet. This root is what Amish families harvested. Its deep growth helped it pull up moisture and nutrients from soil that other plants couldn't reach, which meant it could grow during dry spells or in areas where more delicate crops would fail. The root itself has a mild, earthy flavor with a hint of sweetness. When sliced and cooked, it becomes soft but keeps a little crunch. Amish cooks would boil burdock root with onions and potatoes, or fry it in lard with salt for a simple but filling dish. Some even added it to broths or stews to stretch meals further. Its flavor wasn't bold, but it blended well with other foods, and that made it valuable. Burdock also had health benefits. It was believed to help clean the blood and support digestion. Though the Amish didn't use scientific terms, they trusted plants that made them feel better, especially in a time with no money for doctors or medicine. Burdock became part of both the kitchen and the healing cupboard. The root could be kept cool and fresh for weeks after harvest, making it a helpful food deep into winter. And because the plant often grew wild, families could find it, even if their own gardens had run dry. Today, burdock is more likely to be found in teas and wellness shops. But for Amish families who lived through the Great Depression, it was something far more practical. It was a deep-growing answer to shallow supplies. It was food, medicine, and strength, pulled from the earth by hands that knew how to make the most of what little they had. Not every survival food has to be dull. The Daikon radish, with its crisp bite and clean flavor, brought something fresh and sharp to the table, especially when meals felt heavy or repetitive. During the Great Depression, the Amish turned to this fast-growing root to fill in the gaps. It grew quickly, grew big, and kept well, which made it a trusted part of lean-season meals. Daikon radishes are long and white, often growing over a foot in length. Unlike small red radishes, daikons are milder in flavor with just enough spice to be interesting but not overwhelming. This made them perfect for families who wanted variety in their diet without using hard-to-find ingredients. And since they grew fast, families could plant them early and get food on the table sooner than with many other crops. Amish families had plenty of uses for daikon. Some grated it raw and served it with vinegar, like a slaw. Others pickled it in jars with salt and spices to save for winter. It was especially useful in soups and stews, adding flavor and texture without overpowering the dish. Because it stayed firm while cooking, it made every spoonful feel more filling. The plant didn't ask for much. It thrived in cool weather and grew easily in Amish gardens without machines or fertilizer. If planted in late summer, it could be harvested in fall and stored for weeks. Some families packed the roots in damp sand to keep them fresh until midwinter. What made daikon so valuable was its flexibility. It could be eaten raw, cooked, or preserved. It could bulk up a soup or serve as a side dish. It could be planted more than once a year. And it kept producing even when the soil was tired and the year felt too long. Today, daikon is mostly known in Asian cooking, but the Amish knew its power long before it reached modern store shelves. In tough times, it was a quick-growing solution that fed the body, lifted meals, and reminded families that even simple things could make a big difference. With a name that sounds more like a storybook character than a vegetable, Good King Henry might seem like a strange thing to grow. But to Amish families during the Great Depression, this old-fashioned green was anything but strange. It was a steady, dependable plant that came back every year, no matter how hard the times. Good King Henry was known as a perennial spinach, which means once you planted it, it returned year after year. That alone made it incredibly valuable. In a world where seeds were precious and replanting took time and effort, this leafy green showed up on its own, ready to help. The leaves looked similar to spinach, though a bit thicker and darker. Amish families picked them young for the best flavor. They cooked them just like spinach, steamed, sautéed, or stirred into soups. Some even chopped the leaves into egg dishes or pies. The taste was rich and slightly earthy, perfect for adding depth to otherwise plain meals. Good King Henry wasn't a demanding plant. It could grow in poor soil, didn't need much water, and handled cold weather better than most garden greens. Amish gardeners often placed it near their back doors or along garden paths where it was easy to reach. It was always there, quiet, tough, and generous with its leaves. In early spring, when most vegetables hadn't woken up yet, Good King Henry was already growing. And in late fall, when other crops were fading, it was still hanging on. That made it one of the few greens available during the long in-between months. It gave families the nutrients they needed, especially after a winter of dried or canned foods. Few people today know about this plant, but for those who lived through the hardest years, Good King Henry was a loyal companion. It didn't need much. It just showed up, grew strong, and gave what it could. And in a time when food meant survival, that was more than enough. Turnips were one of the smartest vegetables an Amish family could grow during the Great Depression. Not just because they were tough and easy to plant, but because they gave twice. In early spring, you could pick their leafy green tops for cooking. Later in the year, you could pull the roots from the ground and store them through winter. One plant, two harvests, that's the kind of thinking survival depended on. The leafy tops of turnips were among the first greens ready to eat after a long winter. Amish families boiled the greens like spinach, often with a bit of salt, onion, or a dash of vinegar. They added them to soups or served them beside potatoes and cornbread. These greens were rich in vitamins and gave people strength after months of dried or canned food. Some even fed the tougher leaves to livestock. Nothing was wasted. By fall, the round roots below the greens were ready. White, sometimes with a purple top, turnips had a mild, slightly peppery taste. They could be peeled and boiled, mashed with butter, or sliced and baked with other vegetables. Some Amish cooks roasted them with lard for a warm and hearty dish. Others added them to stews to bulk up meals without needing meat. Turnips grew quickly and could handle cold weather. That made them perfect for both spring and fall planting. If one planting failed, there was still time to try again. They didn't need fancy care or rich soil, just a patch of ground and some water. In return, they gave food that could stretch across seasons. The roots stored well, too. After harvest, Amish families packed them in sand or placed them in root cellars where they stayed good for months. When fresh food was gone and snow was thick on the ground, the turnip pile was still there, waiting. Today, turnips might not be the most popular vegetable at the store, but back then they were quiet champions. They gave early, they gave late, they gave through the cold. For Amish families making it through the hardest years, turnips weren't just another crop. They were a dependable, double-serving answer to hunger. These 25 forgotten vegetables weren't just food. They were survival. They grew in silence, in poor soil, through drought, frost, and hardship. They asked for little, but gave everything. While the world struggled, the Amish turned to the land with wisdom, grit, and generations of knowledge. What they grew wasn't fancy, but it kept families alive, season after season, without machines or modern help. In today's world, most of these plants have been pushed aside, replaced by shiny produce and plastic-wrapped convenience. But hidden in the roots, leaves, and seeds of these old vegetables is something we've lost. Resilience, the kind that doesn't come from a store, but from knowing how to work with the earth, not against it. If one of these vegetables brought back a memory or sparked your curiosity, drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you've seen, grown, or tasted. And if you want to keep learning how people once thrived without modern systems, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the wisdom that still grows quietly, just beneath the surface.